Hi everyone, Angela Kaufman hanging out here with my buddies Muggsy and Spango. And I just wanted to talk to you in this video about, as I've mentioned before, the basis for my new novel, Quiet Man, was to write a fictionalized, a novel, a fiction work that would introduce people to the important but often hidden realities of animal agriculture, in particular the meat industry and the slaughter industry. And today I figured I would broaden that idea out and create a video for those of you out there who are vegan, vegetarian, animal rights activists in any shape or form or variety, or however you channel that activism. Especially now, given that we're in a pandemic and a lot of the ways that we used to try to get our points across, we've got to be creative now, right? We've got to adapt our strategies in terms of how we protest, how we educate, how we demonstrate to the public. So, what's the goal of any protest? Oh, hey, Muggsy. Any protest, really, we're out to educate. We want to inform people about what's going on. We want to trigger their emotions. We want them to care. We want them to become passionate about the issues. And then we have, maybe an action, several action items where they can follow up and what they can do to then help to be part of the change, right? So most of those goals are actually the same goals that we have as writers. Now, when it comes to fiction, people will sometimes say, well, people don't read fiction to learn things. And that's true mostly. We read fiction to escape. We want to become engrossed in a story. But there's a really great book if you're a writer. I highly recommend it. It's called Story Genius, and the name of the author is currently escaping me, but it's called Story Genius. You'll if you Google it, you'll easily find it. And the beginning of the book, the author makes a very compelling case that as human beings, we are hardwired for story. Part of the reason that, oh, yes, just story, and Muggsy wants his belly rubbed. Oh my gosh, yes, you love stories. We love to read stories. We love to be told stories. There's a reason that so many of us are turning to books or even binge watching things on Netflix. Like, we're turning to fiction during this high stress time of the pandemic because fiction relaxes us. And her premise is also, the author, I believe, is a woman of Story Genius. Her premise is also that, sorry, Muggsy knocked the computer around, that we look to fiction to educate us, to help us figure out how we're going to proceed. He's fascinated. You just realized you're a movie star. We look to fiction we look to it for guidance. We look to it to help us solve problems. We kind of fantasize in our minds as we're reading along or watching along with the story of how we're going to solve these life problems. And so fiction can touch people in a way, I believe, that nonfiction can't. So I've been thinking a lot about, how do we reach people? How do we, and protests, the nature of protests are adapting, of course, to the pandemic. The nature of what we're going to do as animal rights activists and as vegans is going to adapt, to fit around these changing times. But I also believe that whether there's a pandemic going on or not, we can use whatever gifts we bring to this movement. So if you're a writer, and maybe you're saying to yourself, well, I don't really want to write an expose. I don't really want to write, I don't write cookbooks. I don't write, books about sanctuaries. Like, maybe that's not your style. Muggsy's not sure where he wants to go. It's okay, baby. But that's okay. Because whatever our different artistic or creative gifts are, we bring that to this movement, and we can reflect what we know about the plight of animals in all these different settings. We can bring that to the table. Come here, baby. It's okay. So, so one way to think of this, there currently there is a growing interest in what some people call vegan literature or even vegan fiction. What that tends to mean is books about, like, very much centered on veganism, vegan themes. There are a few at this point, but I believe it will be growing number of strictly vegan publishers, which is awesome. There's definitely a demand for vegan children's books so that children don't feel isolated and so that we can impart vegan principles and vegan philosophy onto people at a young age, which is wonderful. But I do believe there's a lot of room for growth in this world. He's sitting on the laptop, in this world of literature, because it's so, the genres that are already out there are so, so, so vast. I mean, if you go online and look at genres of fiction, you'll get a long list. And it's, crime, mystery, thriller, paranormal romance, historical fiction, romance, all different genres, and then subgenres even there. So to have vegan literature as its own niche, I think that is important. But when we step back and look at that, tipping the computer down, baby. When we step back and look at that, yeah, let's step back and look at who's going to be drawn to vegan fiction. Chances are you're already vegan, and that's fine, because we need stuff to read too. We need our escapes too. We need stuff to read where we're going to see familiar characters and see familiar themes and feel recharged and inspired and that kind of thing. So that's great. But the point of this video is I wanted to introduce the idea of thinking about how we can create a world in which, let's say, 5 years from now, you can pick up a book in any genre that you love. So maybe you like to read mysteries, right? And you just pick up this random mystery book that was recommended to you, and you're reading along, and it's got a very compelling storyline, and you're really into it. You're trying to figure out who's the killer or whatever. And then the detective is this like really hard-boiled New York City street smart detective who also happens to be vegan and volunteers at an animal sanctuary on the weekends, and just that little tiny detail, when you're a vegan and you're reading this, suddenly that puts a whole different spin on who this character is. And like, if I was reading that, I'd be like, yes, that's awesome. And if someone who's not vegan is reading that, it's, okay. It's an introduction to vegan philosophy, vegan values, and even, specific missions. Maybe there's a specific issue that this detective is really passionate about, and somehow it ties into the mystery they're trying to solve, or it doesn't. And it's just an interesting detail about the detective as a character. So for someone who's not vegan reading that, that's like maybe one of the very, and you guys know, very, very few positive portrayals of vegans in fiction writing, right? So what this does is, hopefully this eventually normalizes the presence of veganism, the presence of conscientiousness about animal rights. It normalizes the question of speciesism and kind of pinpoints it and puts it out there in a way that books in existence under the very specific genre of environmental literature or animal rights literature already do, but they do it for an audience that is going to be very specific, and in some cases already kind of preaching to the choir. So if we were to start kind of putting themes and storylines and characters out there in a way that is maybe broader, and again, it's about representation. For us as vegans, we have recognition of our community being represented well in literature, and for people who aren't vegan, it could be one of the ways to introduce some of these really important issues that are going on. So I was telling my partner earlier, thinking back to when I was growing up, and I'm gonna date myself here, but when I was growing up, I had friends who were gay. I knew I knew people who were gay. It wasn't like I didn't know that was a community, but there was no representation. I had never read a book. I had never heard of a book in which there were, prominent, positively portrayed gay characters. And those of you who are around my age and older, you might remember when Ellen first came out on TV. It was a huge thing. It was a huge thing. It was such a big deal. And now it's like, oh, okay, there's a sitcom with gay characters. Oh, there's, nothing to it. It's still a big deal. And I don't mean to downplay it, because even, in the LGBTQ community, in the Black community, and communities of color, lack of representation is still a huge thing. And it's catching up. It's getting to the point where we're starting to say, holy crap, this is an issue, we need more representation. So I don't mean to imply that, we're good to go there, now let's go on and represent other communities. That's not the case at all. But it makes such a big difference in normalizing and and giving voice to different communities, to have representation that is mainstream, that isn't just a niche specialty. So imagine a time in which, when we're safe to go to bookstores again, and we go to a bookstore and you don't have to go to the section marked, you know, eco literature or whatever, right? Just like for LGBTQ. I mean, there is an LGBTQ section in many bookstores of, literature or nonfiction that is of interest to the community. But there's also emerging more and more and more demand and interest in voices, in characters, just in any genre that represent these communities. So, same idea. Oh, now we're going to do the switcheroo. Here comes Spango. Okay, Spango, now you can sit down. So, same idea. If we get to a point where we don't have to seek out a very specific subgenre that kind of repeats the same themes over and over again, but instead somebody can just pick up, hi, sweetie, I know I love you, can just pick up a random book and they're going to see very positive portrayals, realistic portrayals of vegan animal rights community members and people kind of striving for animal rights missions. So think of different ways you could work that in. I mentioned the mystery. Let's say your thing is to write romance, right? So you could fit that in as part of the plot where you're writing a romance novel, and let's say there's someone who's really head over heels in love and they're dating somebody new, and oh, they learn that person's a vegan animal rights activist, so they start going to protests on the weekends, and then suddenly they learn all these things, and in the dialogue between these two characters, all of a sudden you can expose so much information to a world of people who otherwise wouldn't be looking for that information. So suddenly, and there's always got to be tension, right? So maybe the tension is the person who's not yet vegan, like maybe they grew up and their family is a farm family, and now they've got this conflict, like, oh my gosh, the love of my life is introducing me to this whole other world and getting me to think differently about animal agriculture. But oh crap, that means I can't look at my family the same way anymore, and I'm complicit, and what do I do? Like, it presents some kind of tension. Maybe they have some other conflict of interest where, maybe they're an attorney and they're representing a fishing company who the animal rights people are also trying to shut down. Like, so all of a sudden you can get like really juicy with all these different complex layers of how this blossoming romance is going to happen. And as you're doing it, you're eliciting all this new information. So it's not a matter of an information dump where you're just kind of throwing all these facts out there. Again, you're entertaining, you're writing a story, you're drawing somebody into a world they wouldn't otherwise enter into. And through the dialogue and through the things that happen in the book, you're kind of giving voice to these different issues. And that's very much what I sought out to do with my novel Quiet Man. So, and over the course of many, many revisions, there were times where I had to take sections that really were looking like an info dump, and had to kind of rework it so that what you have is a story that woven into that story is all of this exposition where the reader, because the characters are learning something about the animal exploitation, because the characters are learning it, the reader is also learning it through them. And in my book, there is a vegan character. He's not the main character, but he's instrumental to kind of mentoring one of the main characters and helping them. He's an attorney, and through his advice to another attorney who is not vegan, the attorney who's not vegan is the one who has this aha moment and realizes how the atrocities of the slaughter industry very much relate to his client having a nervous breakdown and committing a violent crime. So it would not have made sense for me to write the main character as vegan, because that would have been too easy. If it's too easy because this vegan character already knows these things, then we as the reader, as the audience, we don't discover it because the character already knows it. So sometimes we have to kind of write outside of what is our community in order to show the larger community what it is we care about. So that's a little bit of food for thought, and I'm going to do probably some follow-up videos with different angles on how we can kind of take that process further. Feel free to get in touch on Facebook if you have any questions. I'm at Angela Kaufman on Facebook and AngelaKaufmanAuthor@gmail.com if you want to reach out by email. Thanks for watching and have a great day.